Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Jen Elder. I'm the director of SAMHSA's Homeless and Housing Resource Center, and we are so excited for you to join us today to the webinar, Public Housing and Serious Mental Illness, Practical Recommendations for Housing Providers. I just want to say a huge thank you to the providers who reached out to us via both SAMHSA and HUD to request this topic. This was really a result of requests from the field, and so we are so excited about the panel that we have put together for you today. So I'll start with just a few housekeeping slides, and then we'll get right into the content. So next slide. Quick disclaimer. HHRC, or the Homeless and Housing Resource Center, is operated by Policy Research, Inc. We are funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, but the views and opinions expressed today don't necessarily reflect those of SAMHSA or HHS. Next slide. We are joined today by American Sign Language interpreters, John and Justin. Thank you so much. We also have live human captioner with us, so thank you, Tina, for being with us today too. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to reach out to us via email or also send us a note through the Q&A. That'll be probably the faster way to get in touch with us. Next slide. Couple final housekeeping notes. We're being joined by a larger group today, so all participant lines are muted and the chat feature is disabled. But that said, we want to hear from you today, so you can use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen in Zoom to submit your questions to us, to submit your reactions. Let us know, like, is this resonating with you, with what you're experiencing? Is the information helpful? We'll make sure to get all of the feedback to the panelists during and after the webinar today. And huge thanks to all the questions we already received. We received over 1,000, I think, questions before this webinar. So the panelists have those, and we're going to try to address as many as we can today. The slides are available now. We'll make sure to get that link into the chat for you if you'd like to download those and follow along. We'll have a recording on the website tomorrow for you to view. At the end of the webinar, you should be redirected to an evaluation. We'll put the link in the chat for that too. Upon completion, you'll receive a certificate of participation for today's webinar. So again, if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to reach out. But with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Vanessa Schick, Associate Professor of Public Health with UT Health, who helped assemble the great panel today and is going to take us forward. Thanks, Vanessa.
Hi, good morning, afternoon, perhaps evening to everyone today. Thank you so much to the Homelessness and Housing Resource Center for putting together this fantastic panel and inviting me to be a part of it and helping to facilitate this conversation. It is such an important one. As we all know, with a housing first model, which is the dominant housing model, there are limited preclusions or contingencies around behavioral health for individuals once they're housed, which is wonderful for housing, but then means that there are sometimes challenges related to being able to support people once they are housed. And so I'm hoping today will be a really nice conversation on what we can do to make sure that people feel supported once they're housed, and individuals who are leading and in charge of the housing are able to have the information that they need to be able to provide that support. So just to quickly go over our quick session agenda, we're going to have 3 speakers. We're first going to do an overview of serious mental illness, then we're going to talk about health equity issues, and then we're really going to talk about, from a practical perspective, what serious mental illness looks like in housing. Finally, we're going to try to get to as many of those wonderful questions that you submitted in advance as we can. Please feel free to continue to submit questions. We will try our best to review and we'll get to anything at the end of the talk. This is our fantastic panel for the day. I will introduce individuals individually right before their talk, but wanted to share the overall list so that way you can see the diversity in speakers in terms of kind of the perspectives that they come from, but also the locations that they're at. So we kind of have, East Coast, West Coast, Texas represented here. So really excited to hear from different people with different perspectives today. So that allows me to now turn it over to our very first wonderful panelist. Allison Pant is a clinical psychologist and professor in the Yale Department of Psychiatry. She's the director of education at the Connecticut Mental Health Center, which provides services to individuals with serious mental illness. Dr. Pant, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm looking forward to learning and hearing more from you.
Thanks so much, Vanessa, and thanks for having me here today. It's really amazing to see how many people have shown up to, wow, 2,600 people. That's a lot of people. Glad you're all here today. So I'm planning to start by talking a little bit about the general issue of homelessness and mental illness and describe what serious mental illness is. I also want to provide some context and some things to consider. Please go ahead to the next slide, Vanessa. Thank you. Want to provide some context and things for people to consider when we're trying to understand the issue of mental illness, and then give some details about some mental health conditions that are frequently diagnosed in people who experience homelessness. Next slide, please. So in a general way, homelessness, as you are probably well aware, is associated with higher rates of mental illness and substance use disorders compared to people who are stably housed. Specifics vary from study to study, but it's well established that there are differences between people experiencing homelessness and people who are in housing, and some notable differences further between people who experience chronic homelessness and people who are sheltered. Next slide, please. So generally, mental illnesses are conditions that affect and have involved changes in people's thinking and behaviors and emotional states. These are usually distressing and cause some difficulty, some level of difficulty for the person who has them, and really can range in severity from fairly mild to quite severe or significant, which we'll talk a little bit more about today. And it's also the case that someone might have just one condition or could experience several conditions at one time or over the course of their life. Next slide, please. So then with regard to what serious mental illness is, while I just established that mental illness itself can cause distress and difficulty in someone's life, a serious mental illness is one that causes more significant or more serious impairment and impacts at least one major area of life activities. These typically are longer in duration, like lasting more than a year, for example. And often mental illness really becomes an issue for people in their late teen or early adult years. And when that happens, the onset of the serious mental health condition can really affect their typical development into adulthood. Next slide, please. But before we go on, I want to talk about some crucial considerations to keep in mind when we're talking about mental illness. They're important because they can help us understand that there are many factors that influence a person's mental health that are not just from within them as an individual. First, I always strongly recommend taking a stance of cultural humility. It's really important because people who identify as members of different groups may experience mental illness differently. For example, certain conditions are diagnosed more frequently in certain racial and ethnic groups and in other populations. People from different cultures may experience mental illness differently and describe their mental health concerns in different ways. So for example, some members of particular cultural groups might talk about their distress by describing physical or somatic symptoms they're having, rather than describing with feeling words. And different groups also understand illness differently. Mental illness and other illnesses as well have different kinds of stigma in their communities, either more or less stigma, and may seek help at different rates and in different ways. So the next point on here is about social determinants of health. This is really a framework for understanding how environmental and social factors affect all types of illnesses, including mental illness. It's an acknowledgement that there are factors outside of us that impact the way we are with regard to our bodies and our minds. These can include things like structural racism, poverty, food insecurity, incarceration, migration, and homelessness itself is actually one of these factors that has an impact on one's mental health. And it's important to keep in mind that these are issues that are happening around us in our communities, and they are affecting us. It's not just an internal experience of a mental illness that is to blame for an individual if they are experiencing these difficulties in life. And then recovery. So recovery has many meanings for us, but in this regard, I'm talking about recovery in the mental health arena. And this really just speaks to the idea that people can and do recover from mental illness and can live very rich and meaningful lives with mental illness. The reality is that many people have exceptionally rewarding lives in their communities, they're employed, many people have homes, although of course today we're talking about folks that don't or are in housing services, people have families and other, that's the last one, full markers of a full life. So while individuals experiencing homelessness and mental illness are facing multiple challenges, to be sure, there are excellent interventions that can address both mental health and structural needs for this population. Okay, next slide, please, Vanessa. So some common conditions there, we could spend many days talking about all of the different kinds of mental illnesses that could affect folks that have that are experiencing homelessness. But I'm going to focus just on 3 for today to give first a brief overview, then a little bit more detail. And this is a very high level review of just a few conditions, but I hope it will be helpful for you today. So let's start first with schizophrenia. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So SAMHSA actually defines schizophrenia as a condition that causes people to interpret reality abnormally. This can include symptoms like hallucinations, delusions, disordered thinking, and difficulty functioning in daily life. Next slide, please. Schizophrenia is in the category of conditions in the DSM called schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders. So it's defined by problems in 1 or more of 5 domains. And I'll say a little bit more about each of these because I think a lot of people heard about delusions or hallucinations, but maybe aren't so familiar with what all of the symptoms actually are. So delusions specifically are fixed beliefs that aren't changed by presenting conflicting evidence. So there are several types of these. Some, which you may be familiar with, are persecutory. So someone believing that they're being harmed or that they're going to be harmed or harassed. A referential, where people think things in the environment are being directed toward them, like the news or radio, for example. Hallucinations are perceptual experiences that don't have a corresponding external stimulus. So the sort of classic question here is, do you hear or see something that other people don't hear or see? And these hallucinations can take place in any sensory modality: visual, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, or auditory. The auditory hallucinations are the most common type that people experience with schizophrenia. These are usually in the form of voices that someone hears. And this isn't under voluntary control, so people can't sort of turn this on and off. And these voices can be really vivid and clear and feel extremely realistic to someone, just like a normal perceptual experience. There are other types of hallucinations too, of course, like tactile hallucinations, where someone might feel like something on their skin or feel like they're being poked or pricked. Visual hallucinations happen when someone is seeing something that other people don't see or that isn't there. An olfactory hallucination might include smelling something that there isn't an external stimulus for to actually cause a smell. Disorganized thinking is another feature of psychosis that typically presents itself through an individual's speech. So people may switch topics a lot or move topic to topic very quickly. They might not answer a question. They might answer a question with words that don't actually answer your question. It's unrelated to what's being asked. And sometimes people have incoherent speech. But it's important to notice that this is different from when someone might be intoxicated, for example, or speak a different language. So want to be careful a little bit about this symptom and not overdiagnosing that. And then grossly disorganized or abnormal motor behavior. This includes things like catatonic experiences or behaviors, or can be on the other end of the spectrum where someone might, laugh to themselves or talk to themselves in a way that's clearly a response to something that's internal to them, as opposed to someone they're talking to or listening to who's actually there with them. And then finally, negative symptoms. This captures two major symptoms that are prominent in schizophrenia: diminished emotional experience and avolition. So the diminished emotional experience might present itself by sort of low expression of emotion when someone is talking or making eye contact with you or in their speech. And avolition is a decrease in self-initiated activities. Someone might show really low interest in socializing. They may sit quietly alone for long periods of time. There are other negative symptoms too, like anhedonia, which is a state where someone doesn't experience pleasure or enjoyment in the activities that they used to enjoy or participate in. Next slide, please, Vanessa. We're going to talk next about bipolar disorder, which is a condition that has very significant mood and energy shifts from very excited and happy and energetic times to very low and sad periods of time. Next slide, please. So this was formerly known as manic depression, and that name is really helpful in understanding actually what the experience of this disorder is like, because there really are periods of mania and depression. There are two main bipolar presentations that are relevant here: bipolar disorder 1 and bipolar disorder 2. And the main difference between these two is whether the individual experiences mania or hypomania. And I'll describe what those two things are. So mania itself is a mood disturbance with elevated or irritable mood, lots of energy and activity that lasts most of the day, nearly every day for at least a week. This week determination is important when we talk about hypomania. You'll see why. Some of the specific symptoms that people may experience include decreased need for sleep, inflated self-esteem, and excessive involvement in activities that have high risk or potential for painful or bad outcomes or consequences, like risky sex, gambling, spending, buying a lot of things. Those are some of the activities that can be present when someone is having a manic episode. These symptoms likely cause significant impairment for the individual, and their functioning can really suffer, often leading to hospitalization in order to reach a point of stabilization. Hypomania, on the other hand, includes many of those same features, but it lasts for a shorter time frame. It's 4 days minimum versus 7 days minimum, which is what you have for mania. And it does show up with changes in problems in someone's functioning, but the episodes usually aren't severe enough to have the same kind of significant impacts that happen in a manic episode. So in both of these cases, important to know that these changes in mood are not based on the effects of substance use or any other sort of medical condition. And that's really important for the diagnostic profile here. So just to recap then, bipolar 1 and 2 both have periods of major depression, but the primary distinguishing factor between the two is that bipolar 1 includes manic episodes, while bipolar 2 has hypomanic episodes. And sometimes people tend to describe bipolar 2 as less severe or not so much of a problem and not as big a deal as bipolar 1. But I think it's important to keep in mind that both of these diagnoses include the depression side, which I will talk about next. And even with someone who's in a hypomanic period rather than manic, that is still really very destabilizing to have the mood swings from really high to really low. So it's important, I think, not to think about bipolar 2 as like not such a big deal, because it really can be very disturbing for people and very hard to manage. So next slide, please. We'll move to major depressive disorder next. Major depressive disorder is one of the most common mental health conditions. You very likely know people in your life that you work with and people in the rest of your life that suffer from and live with major depressive disorder. And the symptoms really can vary from person to person, but they do include low or depressed mood and or decreased interest in pleasurable activities, and then a combination of other symptoms. And these symptoms interfere with a person's ability to do their life, to work, to sleep, eat, and then just enjoy their life in a general way. Next slide, please, Vanessa. Thank you. So sometimes people ask, well, how is a major depressive disorder different from just feeling blue or feeling low or feeling sad? Everyone feels that sometimes, right? Yes, everyone does feel that way sometimes, but there are some distinguishing factors here that make major depressive disorder different than just sort of feeling sad. The first is that symptoms are present for at least 2 weeks. And there's a combination of at least 5 significant symptoms. And if we go to the next slide, I'll just say a little bit about each of these. Thanks, Vanessa. Again, it's 5 of these symptoms, 1 or 2. The first 2 of those, at least one of those has to be present for the diagnosis. But the others include, having significant changes in appetite or weight in either direction, either appetite really high or appetite really low, and then corresponding weight changes. Not having enough sleep or sleeping too much, moving or talking or thinking more slowly, or engaging in movements with no real purpose, like pacing, for example, feeling fatigue and having very low energy, feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt. And then the last one is difficulty. Actually, it's not the last one. Difficulty thinking, concentrating, and making decisions. And then finally, thinking about death or suicide or even attempting suicide. So then to answer the question from before about, what distinguishes major depressive disorder from the blues or just feeling down in the dumps is that there are multiple symptoms and it lasts for 2 weeks or more. It's also possible for someone to have just one episode of depression in their life like this, or more often it is a recurring condition that happens to people when they've had the diagnosis of major depressive disorder. Next slide, please, Vanessa. So there are 2 really important things related to mental health that I just didn't talk about yet and don't have time to really treat with the sort of fullness that they deserve. So I wanted to say a little bit about both trauma and substance use disorders because they're really relevant here and often found among people who are experiencing homelessness. So first about trauma then, unfortunately, it's a nearly universal experience among people who are unhoused. The recent study of homelessness in California by the Benioff initiative at UCSF reported that nearly 3/4 of unhoused folks in their study experienced some kind of physical violence in their lifetime, and 24% experienced sexual violence. So that's sort of any time in one's lifetime. And then in terms of like something that's happened more recently, another study surveyed individuals who were unhoused in 3 different US cities and found that more than half of them reported experiencing violence just in the past 6 months. And 1 in 3 of them reported experiencing multiple forms of victimization in the last 6 months. So we're talking about sort of long-term trauma stuff that's happened potentially in somebody's past and stuff that's happening very recently and concurrently with their homelessness experience. It's important to know that not everyone who experiences trauma is going to develop post-traumatic stress disorder, but PTSD is more highly diagnosed among folks who are unhoused than people in the general population. It's just very, very likely that anybody that you're working with has a history of trauma. I noticed in some of the questions that came in that that's a theme that people are interested in talking about too. So hopefully we'll have some time for some Q&A about that piece. And then finally, a word on substance use disorders. There's so much to say about this and just not enough time. I'll say that substance use disorders, as you know, are quite prevalent among individuals who are experiencing homelessness. And substance use disorders can also co-occur with any of the other conditions I talked about, or basically almost any other kind of mental health concern. And this can happen at fairly high rates among folks who are unhoused. So next slide, please. You've got just one more thing I want to say that, while this mostly sounds like bad news in some ways, it's important to know, like I mentioned earlier, that recovery from serious mental illness really can happen, does happen, and that people can live really good lives with their mental illness, even if they continue to have symptoms throughout the rest of their life. So I just want to leave you with that note of positivity that people really can and do recover from mental illness. And I think then I pass it back to Vanessa. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ponce, for that really wonderful introduction to SMI. I think that it really worked for a very wide audience, and appreciate you sharing it with us. Now we're going to turn it over to our next presenter, Enrico Castillo, who is a community psychiatrist and health equity researcher and educator at UCLA. He currently leads an NIMH-funded study on the jail to homelessness pipeline and serious mental illness. Dr. Castillo, turning it on over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's so wonderful to be connected with all of you. As was mentioned, I'm an associate professor at UCLA. I'm also the associate vice chair for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And my work is focused on health equity broadly in my clinical work as an educator, as a researcher, and with a focus on homelessness. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about, as I know that you all are as well. The QR codes on the slide, they take you to some links where you can learn a little bit more about my work. But if you don't catch them now, don't worry about it. I'll be sharing them at the end as well. And so my talk is entitled Health Equity Considerations for Housing Providers. We do next slide. Thank you. These are my disclosures, and I don't have any conflicts of interest to report. Thank you. These are the 4 objectives that I'll cover today, starting with health equity, with a focus on addressing individuals' vulnerabilities while they're in housing. And then I'll talk a little bit about avoiding criminalization. I'll mention what I mean by that. And then also recognizing and addressing carceral elements within housing programs. I'll define that as well. And then I'll conclude with a brief discussion on trauma-informed housing. And before I go on, I just want to emphasize that all of you are doing really important work. You're doing good work for people who are unhoused or were previously unhoused. You're attending this talk, which means that you're open to new ideas, new experiences, and so I'm very grateful for that. Okay, next slide. So to start us off on the topic of health equity and addressing vulnerabilities, I want to show a short video on that topic.
Okay. Giving you any place to go?
No.
Came across a woman moving her stuff to the sidewalk. LAPD said that the apartment building had some volunteers to help her. Didn't know that as soon as she moved it to the sidewalk, they'd start throwing away everything she owns. It's heartbreaking.
We've been out here 3 months, and I think they've taken our stuff eight times. I used to live in Vail, Colorado, you know, like based $100,000 a year. Had some stuff happen, a divorce, a couple different things that I just lost, kind of gave up on my life, I guess. So that lady over there told me that there's a lot of open cases for me. A lot of people are putting in the work and putting in the information, but no one's following up, no one's coming, no one's doing anything. Oh yeah, I've applied like 5 or 6 places here, and no one wants to hire me because I'm homeless in the way I look, you know. But you know, I always thought like there was like the stigma of like homeless people, and I just think that you don't know until you're out here doing it, and I don't know, be kind, because we do feel invisible, you know.
Yeah, thanks so much for showing that. So just staying on this slide for a second, you know, that video was created by the nonprofit organization Invisible People. They have an incredible organization and a YouTube channel, and I hope you can check out more of their videos. It's really important for me to share a video like this because I want to foreground the perspectives of people with lived experience of being unhoused, and also because I think this video really vividly illustrates some difficult and even traumatic experiences that this population has while they're living unsheltered, and also vulnerabilities that can remain with them even when they achieve some form of housing. Next slide, please. Okay, great. So individuals who are unhoused have immense strengths and resilience. I think that's really important to underscore. But this population also experiences vulnerabilities in all of these domains. And not every individual, of course, but as a population. And so these vulnerabilities can contribute to poor health outcomes. So like Dr. Ponce mentioned, these vulnerabilities arise from inequitable systems, power structures, discrimination, other upstream factors, and shouldn't be considered to be the fault of any individual. But lack of income or financial benefits like SSI, food insecurity, unemployment, hiring discrimination, the stigma that was mentioned in the video, social isolation or disconnection from family and friends, loss of identification papers, ongoing legal cases, fines, other challenges and vulnerabilities as well. Next slide, please. So in this figure on the right, it shows how vulnerabilities, which you can see at the top left, they contribute to many health problems that are shown right below them. And the stress and the injustices and the victimization and the harshness of the streets can become the illness of the body. So speaking about health equity for a second, I feel it's important to be specific. Too often health equity can be thought of as just doing good things for people or, treating everyone exactly the same. But family physician Paula Braveman defines health equity as striving for the highest possible standard of health for all people. And then I think this is the most important part for me, giving special attention to the needs of those at greatest risk of poor health based on social conditions. So to me, that means health equity isn't just about medical treatment or treating everyone the same. It's also about healing those social conditions and individuals' vulnerabilities that make residents in your programs sick. Okay, next slide, please. And because that's the work of health equity, as I understand it, that also means that I think that we need to rethink, reimagine our everyday work. So no matter what that work is, in serving this population, making sure that all of our daily work focuses on reinforcing individual strengths and addressing their vulnerabilities. So more specifically, I hope that you can consider how your programs work to recognize individuals' vulnerabilities and needs, understanding their experiences, how your program individualizes their treatment and their care, and then provides them with case management or connections to benefits, services, skills, local resources, and partnerships to help address those vulnerabilities. So health equity involves, I think, closely examining all of our programs, all of the work that we do, with the ultimate goal of supporting individuals' paths to permanent housing. Next slide, please. So the second point I want to make is about criminalization. And by criminalization, I mean anything that places individuals at risk of arrests, fines, and incarceration. So criminalization, it worsens individuals' risks for returning to homelessness, and it can lead to negative mental health outcomes. Interactions with law enforcement can place individuals who are unhoused at risk for injury or even death. So in your housing programs, it's likely that your residents have a range of experiences with law enforcement, including negative and even traumatizing experiences. So in working with your clients, I hope that you can ask them about these experiences and then use their stories to examine your own program's relationship with law enforcement. So in my clinical experience and also in my research, unfortunately, I've seen housing programs that often call law enforcement on their residents. I've seen programs use the presence of law enforcement or threats to call law enforcement as a form of leverage to control residents' behaviors. And so I'm not saying that's, at every program, of course, I think, but only a minority of programs do this. But I want to encourage you all to reevaluate your policies and your procedures, if possible, and to supplement the use of law enforcement with local alternatives. And I'll give some examples. So, some cities have 988, which is a non-law enforcement mental health crisis hotline that can be used as an alternative to 911, people who are trained in crisis response but are not law enforcement. Some locales also have homeless crisis services that can be accessed through 988 or 311. And then many locales also have nonprofit organizations that specialize in crisis management that can serve as an alternative to law enforcement in some circumstances. So if these resources are available in your area, I really want to encourage you all to build in these alternatives into your protocols. Next slide, please. Another consideration for your housing programs is to avoid inadvertently, and then I really want to underscore that, inadvertently recreating an environment that resembles jails and prisons, so a carceral environment. And of course, I don't mean literally like cells with bars on them, but more so an environment of surveillance or lack of privacy or rules that can be perceived as punitive, adversarial relationships between residents and staff or landlords, and other experiences and structures that can evoke the incarceration experience. This is unfortunately a common enough experience that there is even an organization called Unhoused Tenants Against Carceral Housing. And so I encourage you all, I put their website on the bottom. I encourage you all to check out their website and their list of demands, which is a great summary of the challenges that some residents face in some housing programs. And the bullet points on the left, they speak to the elements of housing programs that they describe as being hotspots for contributing to tensions or carceral environment. So again, in my own clinical work and in my research, I've known housing programs that, unfortunately, they strip search residents when they enter a building. Programs where housing staff yell or speak harshly to residents, or residents feel afraid. Some programs enforce rigid curfews with lockout times where residents are literally locked out of a building if they miss the curfew. So, and also carceral elements can appear in much more subtle ways. So the examples I gave are it may sound very extreme, but for instance, more subtle ways like housing rules and routines that are designed to impart structure or discipline for residents, but instead inadvertently evoke fear or avoidance or anger or other trauma responses, especially among those who have been previously incarcerated. So this issue of a carceral environment, I encourage you all to reflect on your programs, not just the official policies, but really the minutia of your daily work and your interactions between staff, residents, landlords, property management. Sometimes the issues are clear, but again, sometimes these issues can be very subtle to nearly invisible. So the perspectives of your residents can be really helpful in identifying areas for reform. So often when I think about the rules of a healthcare system that systems that I work in, and also housing systems, these rules are created based on sometimes requirements, regulatory requirements, or funding requirements, or this desire to create order and uniformity, one size fits all, but without considering sometimes individuals' experiences and their vulnerabilities. So please consider residents' histories of incarceration and confinement when examining your program's rules and your daily interactions. Next slide, please. And that brings me to my last point, which is about trauma-informed housing. I saw some comments about this already in the Q&A and also in the questions that were received beforehand. So thank you for this focus on trauma. So being trauma-informed is more than just understanding trauma. It's a whole organization approach to trauma. It involves recognizing that trauma is pervasive, especially in the populations that we all serve, and that also the design of our programs and the work that we do with clients can inadvertently worsen trauma or provoke trauma responses, or they can help individuals heal and recover from trauma. So trauma-informed housing, it also means involving residents in the housing, in decision-making, and ultimately improving relationships between staff and residents. And so with that, I want to show a brief clip on the next slide.
To me, trauma-informed care and design means thinking about how other people have experienced life and how that can impact how people show up daily. It's not meet us where we're at, we're trying to help you. It's what do you need to be able to live somewhere consistently and stable. I'm a social worker working in the prenatal, perinatal field. I lived at Flat 9 here in Boston for about 2 years. I really wanted to be connected in a community because this is where you're living and growing up. You want to be secure and safe. Sometimes a lot of those things are compromised in housing. I can live here, but can I walk down the hall? Can I go talk to the management? That's how I got to know POA and became a part of this project. I see that trauma-informed care will be influencing a lot of places, more housing opportunities where people are more involved in the decisions that go into where they're living. Flat 9 will always be home to me. It's built such a strong community and sense of belonging. It's really, really special to me.
Great, thank you so much for watching that. That video was created by the Preservation of Affordable Housing. So we can go to the next slide. No, thank you. Okay, so for the sake of time, unfortunately, I can't go into this topic in detail, but I wanted to show you that video, which speaks a little bit about this topic of trauma-informed housing, and then to share with you a resource that I hope you can use to learn more about it. So if you look at the QR code there, it takes you to the organization POA and their toolkit for trauma-informed housing. I'm not affiliated with POA, but I really respect their work. So to tell about the toolkit a little bit, it's a free toolkit that's available for a download from the website there. It includes training tools, sample surveys to measure progress, even architectural and design guides for how to design housing spaces that are trauma-informed, exercises that you can do with your staff and also with the residents, discussion guides, creative activities like art-based activities, ideas for projects and initiatives that your organization can do, and case studies. So it's a wonderful resource, and I hope you'll consider using it. And this is a topic that the next speaker, Ms. Kilgallen, will also talk about in the next presentation a bit more. But one thing in thinking about trauma-informed housing, it's not just one fix, it's really a whole organization approach, and it takes time. So it's building a culture around trauma and changing, again, like I mentioned, the everyday work that we do to support individuals' goals to achieve permanent housing. Next slide, please. I hope you'll also check out SAMHSA's guidance document for a trauma-informed approach. SAMHSA describes 6 principles of trauma-informed approach, which is safety, trustworthiness, peer support, collaboration, empowerment, and then cultural, historical, and gender issues. Next slide, please. And I hope you can check it out because I found this part of their guidance particularly helpful, where they apply those principles that I mentioned to an organization's governance, policies, the physical environment, partnerships with local resources, et cetera. So they provide, I think, really practical sample questions that you can use to examine your programs or to start a dialogue also with your teams. You can use these questions during your team meetings, for example. Next slide. So in closing, I hope you'll take these points away from my talk, which is health equity and addressing individuals' vulnerabilities, avoiding criminalization, recognizing and addressing any carceral elements in your programs, and then introducing this concept of trauma-informed housing. Next slide. If you're interested, I hope you can check out some of my recent publications on the topic of health equity, homelessness, mental health, crisis services. You can check that out there. And then last slide, please. And then on this slide, there's some interesting books, podcasts on the topic of homelessness that I really enjoy, some QR codes that'll take you to the trauma-informed toolkit, and then links to my work as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Castillo. That was wonderful reminders, new information, lots of resources, just really fantastic overall. Finally, we will have our final presenter from Search Homeless Services. Christine Kilgillen is a licensed professional counselor and an associate program manager with Search Homeless Services, and a nonprofit organization that serves Houston's unhoused and formerly unhoused community. She oversees interdisciplinary care teams within permanent supportive housing, which provide wraparound services to clients with a wide range of physical and mental health needs. All right, turning it on over to you, Ms. Killigan.
Thank you, Vanessa. And hi, everybody. Really excited to be here and be talking about this with everybody today. So Dr. Ponce, Dr. Castillo talked a bit about a number of different things. I'll kind of be carrying a little bit of that forward and talking a bit about some of the diagnoses that were discussed rather than belaboring the point and talking about symptoms and things like that. My hope is to talk a bit more about what this actually looks like in housing, what you're likely to see as a result of some of these diagnoses. And then after we go through that, we can talk a little bit about interventions and things that you might be able to do to address some of these behaviors and foster a sense of inclusion and community within the housing sites. So starting a bit with depression, some of the things that we tend to see a lot with folks that are very depressed, and again, this is super common within this population, are things like room hygiene issues and personal hygiene issues. So we tend to see folks that have units that they really have a difficult time maintaining. And, this can be because of the motivation or lack of interest or just inability to be able to maintain their units the way they may like to. I've also heard folks say, they don't feel like they deserve a clean space or don't deserve to live in a nice environment. And so the difficulty maintaining that is a big challenge and obviously impacts their housing and the community in a lot of different ways. Similarly, personal hygiene needs might be an issue as well, difficulty taking care of oneself. One of the things that I want to point out in particular is that anger and emotional dysregulation, so difficulty maintaining the intense emotions that one is having and managing those emotions, can be really common with this as well, particularly in men. We've observed men's presentation of depression can look a bit different from other folks. And so this is something that you might be seeing as well. And then, that isolation and avoidance, right? Certainly the less visible things like sadness and hopelessness are probably going on, but I think the things that we're likely to see more is that people are not coming out of their units, that they're isolating more, avoiding the community. You might need to do wellness checks on them to make sure they're okay. So you're probably seeing some of those things. And the graph here just kind of demonstrates the prevalence of depression. I mean, this data was taken from one of my programs a number of years back, but I think the data is still relevant. About 49% of clients experience moderate to severe levels of depression at program entry. And so that's a significant portion. It just shows how pervasive this really is in our housing programs. Next slide, please. Okay. So to give a visual, this is an actual unit from one of my old clients that we've served here who experienced really serious depression and polysubstance use, which can certainly factor into this as well. But it just goes to show, I mean, the difficulty maintaining, and then it kind of just builds on. I mean, this is a little bit of some might look at this and think, oh, this is hoarding. Yeah. Maybe a little bit, but I think more this is just about not being able to get rid of the things and be able to motivate oneself to be able to clean up and to take care of themselves the way they really would like to. So just to kind of demonstrate, we even got this gentleman help to clean his apartment with the plan to be able to sustain it, of course. And yeah, sure enough, very quickly, within a week or two, it went back to looking much like this, which is unfortunate, but yeah. Okay, next slide, please, Vanessa. Thank you. Dr. Ponce and Dr. Castillo talked also a bit about, trauma in housing, and I'm going to focus a little bit on post-traumatic stress disorder. A lot of folks that we work with are diagnosed with PTSD. And if you think about it, homelessness in and of itself can be a traumatic experience because you're focusing on survival. likely to be witness to or victim of some form of violence, and any number of other things. So in addition to that, many, if not most of our clients have also experienced some other form of trauma in their early life or throughout their lifespan. So this is something that we see a lot of. And what you may be seeing as a result of PTSD is, folks that are experiencing just overwhelming bouts of sadness, anxiety, or anger. I think one of the things that really stands out to us in our programs is that we tend to see a lot of explosive and reactive behavior. And this often is a function of trauma and the emotional dysregulation that can occur with trauma. So the behavioral responses might seem completely out of proportion to what you might expect to see based on the situation. Like you might be talking about something that seems pretty innocuous, like, hey, just want to talk about the fee that you owe for your replacement key, and it results in a significant reaction from the person. And so that could be triggering in some way, but in general, that managing of those intense symptoms that can be really tough for folks who have a lot of trauma. They could be triggered a lot by that, like tough bad cop approach. If we're approaching them from a place of being really firm, that can also kind of trigger an emotional response, not surprisingly. And then you might also be seeing some interesting patterns of sleep and wake and sleeplessness and wake patterns. Folks that have PTSD will experience flashbacks at times if they're triggered. They are likely to experience nightmares. And so this can cause some disordered sleep patterns where they might be awake and up and about at night and sleeping throughout the day. I've kind of seen that a couple of times with folks that I've worked with. So all just considerations. Next slide, please. Okay. And Dr. Pons talked a bit about the psychotic disorders. I've summarized a bit about the hallucinations and delusions here, but won't go into a ton of detail about the general parts. What I do want to highlight is that and I've kind of lumped psychotic disorders together because really psychosis can occur in, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. It can occur in major depressive disorder, and substance use. So really kind of a little bit of everything. But folks that are experiencing hallucinations, for instance, may seem distant or preoccupied. If they are experiencing something internal, they might not be able to focus on the conversation that you're having. They might seem preoccupied with something else. They may engage in disruptive behaviors like banging, yelling, responding to things that aren't real to us. And I say real to us intentionally because they are so very real to the person that is experiencing them. And on the flip side, delusions, so those fixed false beliefs about an external reality, what we see a lot is, that folks may feel persecuted or paranoid, feeling like other residents, landlords, maintenance staff might be going into their units, moving things around, stealing things, or are out to get them. And so we do see a lot of that. So what you might experience are people, filing grievances saying, hey, maintenance keeps coming into my room, or my neighbor keeps coming into my room and stealing things, and you wind back the camera and you don't see any evidence of that. So there might be something like this going on. We've also, I've had folks share that they think that they're being poisoned through the air vents, that the property management is slowly poisoning them through air vents and things like that. The image that you see here kind of demonstrates a bit of that. This is from a resident who did have schizophrenia and put several large holes in their unit, trying to identify where the source of the noises that he was hearing were coming from. I've worked with an individual for a very long time, a number of years ago, who had these, paranoid beliefs, had these paranoid feelings and delusions, and was convinced that somebody was watching her, that there were cameras in her unit and wires. And so, I walked into her unit one day and there were just holes all over the place as she was trying to identify where the cameras are, where the wires are, where the microphones are. And that was a relatively common experience, unfortunately. But from a property management and, property ownership perspective, that is highly problematic. It causes a lot of damage. The individual with this picture here actually ended up tunneling through the roof and then out into the hallway. So these things are, they are firm beliefs that they have, so convincing that they will go to all of these lengths to figure out where it's coming from and to identify it to make themselves feel more comfortable. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and just a quick note about substance use that, we've heard some of the numbers about substance use in the homeless population. What we see in our programs, man, it's likely highly underreported. Not everybody will disclose it. We probably would guesstimate that about 70% of folks in our housing programs use substances actively or have used within the past year. And part of it is that, they're not necessarily likely to seek treatment when they're homeless. It's really hard to do that when you're not housed. So many use substances to self-medicate or to cope with the realities of their situation. So, this can obviously impact their ability to pay rent consistently and on time. Something that our case managers are encouraged to do is to budget with folks and budget substance use in. Make sure you're paying the rent first, and then whatever's left over after that, you can do with what you want to. But at least they're stably housed if they can pay the rent first and kind of incorporate that into their budget. I mean, that's realistic. That's harm reduction. This can often impact the quality of their unit. Again, unit hygiene, it may not be the priority if they are actively using substances. They may have other people in their unit frequently using, and that might result in, lease violations depending on the property rules. And then in extreme circumstances, this taking over of the unit where the dealer may end up kind of like functioning out of the person's unit, especially if that individual owes them money. They kind of may just take over, and that becomes a really complicated possession issue with the unit. So, and unfortunately, the reality is it can also lead to overdose deaths, especially with the increase that we're seeing in fentanyl in, Houston and all over the place, and not just in opiates, but, kind of in everything right now. That is becoming an increasingly disturbing reality. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit. Are they ready for change? So that's one of the things to assess as you are working with folks. And that's one of the things that my teams are continually assessing. Are they ready for change? So knowledge of the problem is a good start, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do something different right away. I know that I should be eating salads and going to the gym every day. Am I doing it? Absolutely not. There's a process and it takes a long time, and change is really hard. So I won't go through them in too much detail, but if you look at that image there, the bottom step is pre-contemplation. I don't even know that I have a challenge. I don't even know that anything is wrong. So I'm not going to do anything about it. The next step is contemplation. So I recognize that I have an issue and I'm thinking about changing it, maybe not really sure. Preparation is when you are thinking that you want to do something different. And so you start to think about what the steps are for change. Action is actually beginning to take some of those steps to be able to make the change, whatever that looks like. And then maintenance is sustaining that change. Most of us do not go running up these steps without any issues. Most of us will go up 3 steps and fall down 5, go up 2 steps and fall down 4. It's a process. It takes a number of attempts to be able to really get it right. And that's super normal. That's just the way change happens. It's tough. It takes a long time and it can take multiple tries. And so, a certain degree of building trust and relationship building with residents can be really critical, because if they feel respected, then they're likely to take feedback and just be able to listen to what the reality of their situation is when you share with them, hey, this is the status of your housing. This is kind of what we need to say. Next slide, please. And as the previous presenters indicated, it's important to try to approach folks from a trauma-informed lens. And so this is accomplished by realizing the widespread impact of trauma. every person has probably experienced trauma. Nobody's immune from it. Recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma in others. So, you know, as we've kind of shared these different experiences that folks may have, these flashbacks, these nightmares, this feeling on edge all of the time, maybe being explosive and reactive, or shutting down, all of these signs and symptoms. And then most importantly, helping to prevent re-traumatization. Okay, next slide, please. There are likely also times when you find yourself needing to de-escalate a resident, sorry if I'm saying client, habit, a resident that may be in crisis or may be heightened from something. So just to give a brief overview of some of the de-escalation skills that can be helpful, actively listening to the resident. So folks tend to become escalated when they are feeling vulnerable, when they aren't getting needs met, you know, things along those lines. And so actively listening, what is it that you need? What is it that you want? You might not be able to fulfill that need, but hearing them out and hearing what the needs are goes a long way for you to be able to understand them and for them to feel heard. Find a way to agree with or validate their position. And this isn't to say that you're going to agree with the way they're talking or, you know, the way they're talking to you or the way that they're behaving, but it could be, man, I'd be really upset if that happened to me too. Validating the feeling or the experience that they're having. So just finding something to agree on to be able to kind of level the playing field a little bit. Be concise and use plain language. Folks in this situation have kind of, their thinking brain is offline, so they're not going to be able to hear this beautiful speech that you have to give them. They're not going to be able to process these big words. So just short, sweet, to the point is the best way to approach that conversation. Offer choices. And the key here is offering choices that are acceptable to you. So just two simple things. Either way, it's going to be acceptable to you. So I can see that you're really upset right now. This doesn't feel like a productive conversation in here. We can either go outside and take a walk and talk about it, or you can go back to your unit and come back when you're feeling calmer or more able to talk. So just really simple, like, here are your choices. It kind of sets a limit that, like, we're not going to continue this conversation here with this happening in the middle of the community room, but we can talk about it later on. And along those lines, set clear limits in respectful ways, right? Like, you need to be able to tell folks, like, you have to pay your rent, you have to, you know, yeah, you have to keep your unit clean. And as long as we're setting those clear limits in a respectful way that, yeah, that just respects their autonomy and their personhood, then it's more likely to help de-escalate. And lastly, repeat as needed, because it's not likely to take the first time. So you may need to rinse and repeat a few times, but hopefully with these tools, they will be able to kind of come back down to baseline. Next slide. Okay, and then super briefly, what does this look and sound like concretely? So your tone of voice is going to be calm, gentle, soft. By doing this, and by not, you know, if we begin speaking more loudly, we're kind of matching them, it's likely to just kind of continue increasing until it gets more out of control. But by speaking calmly and gently, they're kind of forced to come down to your level a little bit so they can hear you, and it's likely to de-escalate a bit, just in and of itself. Expressing concern for the resident, let them know they're being listened to and understood. And then, as we mentioned before, finding a way to agree with them or to validate their position rather than getting to the truth, right? Not fact finding right now, just trying to understand what's going on. And then the nonverbals, which are as, if not more important, taking a non-threatening body posture, nodding your head to indicate understanding, not crossing your arms, which kind of indicates that you're sort of closed off or feeling defensive. And at their level, if possible, standing if they're standing, sitting if they're sitting, so that you're not standing over them, which can feel imposing. Eye contact, following their lead. You want to make eye contact, but not like drill a hole in their head with your eyes, just kind of match where they're at, and just taking those cues from them. And same thing with personal space. Close enough that it feels, you know, like I trust that you're not going to hurt me, assuming you do trust that, and not so close as to invade personal space. All of these things are also assuming that you feel safe in the interaction. I think that's really important. I mean, you will know when you feel like you can comfortably de-escalate the situation, especially if it's somebody you know and have rapport with. But of course, if you're not feeling safe in the interaction, then that is a different thing and you know, will need to be handled differently. Okay, next slide, please. I'm running low on time. So a little more about how to intervene, and this is at the individual level, but not quite so person to person. So you may find yourselves in a situation where you'll need to reach out to the person's emergency contact. If they are in crisis and they have somebody on file that can maybe help to mediate or intervene, that could be an option. When possible, you know, offer some degree of leniency if that is possible. Whether it be like offering payment plans for rental arrears or meeting with the resident and their support system to mediate a solution to behavioral problems or room issues. I think that can go a long way with folks. And, you know, again, that change, we go up 2 steps, we fall down 3. Hearing it once might not make the difference, but if we are able to pull in their support system, work with them, it might make that difference. Assist with requesting a reasonable accommodation if that is appropriate based on what's going on with them. Like if it's somebody banging on the floor and it's driving their downstairs resident nuts, you know, a reasonable accommodation to move them to the first floor might be an option. If they have case management or other supports, and they might be willing to enter treatment, substance use treatment, mental health treatment, that's a connection that could be made. And then if they're a danger to themselves or others, or in a state where they cannot function because of their mental illness, there are different options in different states for involuntary commitment. I preface that this is a last resort because we never want to take away someone's freedom and their autonomy. And there are situations where that is the most appropriate thing to do, and it varies by state. So you know, could look into that if that's a situation that feels necessary. Next slide. Okay, and then at the community level, establishing a relationship with your federally qualified medical center, if you do have one locally, can be really helpful because they might have folks that can come out to assess individuals. They might have case management that they can offer or other crisis resources. And so if you're able to kind of partner with them, that could be really beneficial, a beneficial resource. Providing opportunities for life skills development. So folks that have been homeless for a long time may not know how to do some of these things that we kind of take for granted, like, you know, caring for their apartment, paying bills, getting a money order. In one of my programs, we have a cleaning bucket loan program where residents are are able to borrow a bucket of cleaning supplies to be able to clean their units, which is really helpful, especially when they have no income. And so our case managers will go do a home visit, establish like what needs to be done, what the needs are, demonstrate if necessary, and then lend them the bucket so then they can return it and then follow up to make sure that, you know, things were done as they need to be, which has been really helpful for a lot of folks, especially around inspection time. And then lastly, community building. So one of the big things that we hear a lot from residents and identify a need for is this sense of community. Formerly homeless folks often go from being on the streets around other people or in encampments, and then they go to like 4 walls and feel really isolated and alone. So if we can build community through groups or town halls or things like that, it can help to build a sense of inclusion. It can also create a feeling of solidarity and support, whereas other residents may let you know if there's a concern about somebody else, like, hey, this person seems to not be doing okay, or I haven't seen them in a week, maybe we should check on them. Okay, and then last slide, Vanessa. A couple of just like, you know, how to intervene, but maybe avoid these things. So, you know, avoid trying to convince folks that they need to change their behavior. What you can do is listen actively, use clear, factual language, and, you know, yeah, just let them know clearly what it is that they need to do, but avoid telling them what they need to do, because that will likely either lead to confrontation or like acquiescence, like, okay, I'll do that, but then they don't actually change. If somebody is experiencing psychosis, especially delusions, trying to talk them out of those delusions is not generally effective and likely to cause them to double down. If anyone's experienced this, you're probably amazed at how firm the beliefs are and how seamlessly folks can seem to like combat your logic with something else that supports their beliefs. And lastly, don't try to counsel or fix them. We want to prevent re-traumatization at all costs. So offering to connect them to trained clinicians, supportive services, that'll be a good bet. And that is all I have. Thank you all so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I am going to stop sharing the presentation so that we can all, there we are. So that we have a bit of time for discussion. I think we have about 20 minutes or so. Lots of good questions, in the chat, lots of questions that people submitted prior to the chat. Obviously, we're not going to be able to get to all of those in 20 minutes. So I just wanted to kind of group them to talk about some of the kind of larger themes that are coming up. And so one of the themes that I saw a lot in the chat, in the questions that were submitted, and in the presentations themselves was about trauma and developing trust. So a lot of the residents, as we've heard, have had histories with traumatic experiences. How do we work to develop trust in the system among clients who have lost trust based upon previous negative experiences? Any recommendations?
So I have sort of a general thought about it, which is there's so many junctures in the lives of the folks that we're working with in these contexts where it's a challenge, where there's a fight, where there has to be conflict in honestly just in terms of survival and a lot of the lives of the folks that we're talking about who are experiencing homelessness. And just in a general way, trying to find ways to be next to someone moving in the same direction as opposed to against the person or confronting the person or challenging the person, even when the behavior that you're seeing or what the person is saying or what's being presented is something that doesn't sit right with you, feels worrisome, is concerning. Just being as often as possible alongside your person and trying to move forward together is just, for me, a very important general frame. Now, there are all kinds of variations that fall into the bucket about, what exactly to do and how to exactly handle a situation. But I think especially when we're talking about people who have trauma histories, who have had bad experiences in the medical system, in the mental health system, with regard to their housing and in their families and all of the other places, finding us to be allied with them as opposed to challenging or fighting with them is, I think, a very important piece of establishing trust. And then once you have that trust, there are ways to challenge things, to push someone toward whatever their goals are, to be working on some of these issues. But if we come at people in a challenging fashion from the get-go, it is going to be almost impossible to establish a trusting space for moving forward. And Christine, I loved so much of what you talked about with regard to just trying to understand people, be with people, accept people as much as you can. And I also understand that those of you who are providers working in programs with folks that are presenting some very challenging behaviors, it can feel easy. I sit here easily on my Zoom telling you, oh, be nice to people. And that can maybe seem like kind of hollow feedback, but I do think there's something important about developing and maintaining the human connection with somebody, especially given so many of our folks who are experiencing homelessness are dehumanized at every turn in the community.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I know it's a challenging question, but I think that response is actually a response to so many of the questions that we received about kind of specific situations that people have encountered, right? It's just your general way of being and the way that you connect and approach to people. Any other thoughts? If not, we'll kind of move on to kind of get through as many questions as possible. No? Okay. Okay, yeah, it was fantastic answer. Thank you so much. So I want to, for kind of pause on talking about specific situations, which I know was a lot of what came up. But I want to talk about some of the unique challenges about working in a housing setting. And the first being that individuals in housing oftentimes have neighbors, right? If you're a housing provider, you're oftentimes not just responsible for that individual, but also for the many other tenants. So reading a few of the questions kind of under that category. Other tenants in our housing unit are disturbed by the actions of mentally ill tenants. Any remedies to help the group? What actions can the building management take towards a tenant who has an EDP and traumatizes her neighbors with children and staff? Should we think about housing separately? What about recovery-based housing? So just thinking about kind of overall, how do we support all residents? Any thoughts or recommendations there, whether it's individual or policy-based?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so much and so little, I think. My thoughts go to the community aspect. Like there are things you could do at an individual level, I think. If somebody is, and we encounter a lot of this, somebody is having serious mental illness, is causing some disruptions, whatever it may be, and is not, not on medications. There is only so much you can do because we can't force people to enter treatment. And so, I mean, I think the starting point is, is probably what y'all are doing, which is having conversations with those folks just to see what it is that they're willing to do and to share, kind of, again, clearly, this is the problem. I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm curious to hear what you think will be a solution. So, hey, neighbors are reporting that you are banging on your walls late at night and yelling. That can't continue to happen. How can we help you get the supports that you need so that that doesn't continue to happen? And from there, it might look like, case management, if that's an option. It might look like connecting them to a local clinic or encouraging them to seek out treatment there. I think more often than not, right? That's not like that's the ideal, but that probably isn't the way the conversation goes. So to the extent that you can be clear about what will happen if they cannot get the supports that they need to be able to manage that. Yeah, I don't know. It sounds kind of cold, but I think sometimes the kindest thing we can do is to be transparent about what we need and what will happen if that doesn't happen. And then the community aspect, like if there are community building components that are feasible and people in the community can get to know them, I found that to be helpful. Like I've had other residents come to me and say like, listen, this is happening again. I'm really frustrated. And then we can sort of intervene and try to mediate maybe, or we can follow up with the individual to be able to sort of offer some supportive services or see if we can do anything effective. Yeah. I don't know if that answers it, but that's what comes to mind. It's a tough situation.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a difficult question, right? And you want to be supportive of everyone and what's the best way of doing that. And so thank you so much for answering that. I also want to think about, so the other for housing providers, they need to think about all tenants, but they also need to think about all of their staff, right? And housing providers, there's lots of different staff. So sometimes we just think about people who are, direct, frontline, maybe if they have a case manager. But a few people brought up questions about other folks who are on staff. So 2 questions here. How do you handle an office manager / landlord that state, I'm not a social worker to deal with tenants with mental illness? Another person asked, please describe any tips and techniques for maintenance personnel who have the most day-to-day interactions with residents with SMI. So kind of thinking about the diversity of individuals who interact with folks, what recommendations can we provide to individuals who don't feel fully equipped in order to do so.
I have sort of a general answer to it, and then think that maybe others may have more specific advice to offer. But so I'm the director of education at the Connecticut Mental Health Center, which is a large public mental health center in New Haven, Connecticut. Serves individuals who have serious mental illness, several thousand people a year who live in and around New Haven. And one of the things we try to do at CMHC, which might be applicable to your organizations, is to really think about how everybody who works at our place, whether they are a doctor, administrative assistant, someone who works in our plant operations, a therapist, we are all there working on the same mission, which is to provide care and support to our folks to reach their goals. And the reason I bring this up is to say that I think there is an organizational level intervention that can happen around thinking that the maintenance guy's job isn't just to do maintenance, and the office manager's job isn't just to do whatever the administrative tasks they're doing, but all of this is in service of serving the individuals who are coming to your organization for help. And if that is an attitude that your organization has, then it's easier to have conversations with everybody about how to work toward the goal of supporting all of the individuals. Now, the office manager's job is never going to be to provide mental health care to the individual. And it's not the maintenance person's job to do that either, but it can help with a sort of scope of attitude about what it is that we're doing as an organization. And that is part of being trauma informed also. And so what specifically to do, I'm going to leave that to Christine, who I think you might have the better answer to that, but just wanted to give that more general frame, because I think it can be helpful if everybody can be on the same page, that we're trying to do the same kind of work, although we do different specific tasks in the organization.
I don't have any answers that you guys don't. But I will say, I mean, I think if nothing else, like what comes to mind when I'm hearing I'm not a social worker is maybe that I don't feel like, yeah, I either should have the responsibility of dealing with some of the things that come up with this work, because it's really hard. Or maybe not feeling like you have all of the tools that you need and you might want to have to be able to help support the people that are coming to you with all of these different challenges. I think if nothing else, active listening, just listening to them and letting them be heard and approaching them with a trauma-informed lens goes a long way. Just assuming that there's trauma in play, listening to what their needs are and trying to help them meet their needs, without like, and, you can share some feedback, but even that, I don't have the answers when people come to me, and I wouldn't expect any of us to know offhand, like, yeah, this is what it's going to be. They're going to have to be the ones to solve their problems, and we're not going to have all of the answers. But if we can listen to them and just provide a shoulder, provide a caring response, provide some empathy, that goes a long way and often is the only thing that people are really looking for. Beyond that, like maintenance staff that comes to mind, the one thing I would say is, yeah, like empower any staff within the organization to set boundaries for themselves. It can be tough. I'm thinking of situations where maintenance staff in some of our programs are subject to some unfortunate experiences and encounters just by the nature of their work. And so to the extent that they feel comfortable setting boundaries with other residents, communicating with other program staff and other, the landlord property manager, just to make sure that everybody is aware of what's happening or what's going on, or, if there are concerns in the community. I think that's really helpful, just empowering them to be able to, set those boundaries and speak up if something happens that's concerning.
Yeah, the only other thing that I would add is I think it's really important to set those boundaries, as was just mentioned, but also helping people understand, like including the office manager and including a maintenance staff, that, all of us, we're all on a team and we can all make an impact, even in the small moments. And so you don't need specialized training to make a positive impact on people. And sometimes people don't feel like, oh, because I don't have a license, then I can't make a positive impact. But trying to create that culture for the team that, every interaction is meaningful and important, that could sometimes be helpful as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, I really appreciate all thoughtful answers, and to like a very, very complicated question. So I kind of want to take it. So we talked a lot about how people themselves can interact with others, handle situations. I now want to think about how individuals can, where they can go to seek help. So kind of two sides to this. One was kind of in reference to something that Dr. Castillo discussed earlier, which is kind of calling 911 or the police and thinking about when you call for help, who you call for help, right? So there was one question, how do you know when to involve the police, other agencies when dealing with a serious mental health crisis? And then on the flip side of that, right, because that's not the only number we can call, is housing providers are within larger communities, right, where there's oftentimes supports available. So are there any suggestions for other types of community partners, particularly at the national level? So somebody asked about NAMI and whether NAMI would be a good organization to bring in. Others talked about mental health first aid. So wondering what your recommendations are there, or whether there are other organizations where folks can go in order to, seek guidance, have support, so they don't feel alone in supporting the residents. So kind of two sides to that question there.
Yeah, I can start, and then I definitely want to turn it over to my other presenters. Is so 988 is a national rollout, and so I hope that people learn more about 988 and start to build it into their protocols as a non-law enforcement option for mental health crisis. But I think NAMI is an excellent resource, and also other community-based organizations, asking if they could do presentations at your housing site, or it could be virtual, it could be in person, but oftentimes they're really excited to make those connections. I think it's challenge. What I would encourage everyone actually is really challenging to make a new connection in the middle of a crisis. So to try to create time, I know that that's a really difficult thing for everyone, but to create time to try to form a new connection every now and then, and to build those into your protocol so that when the crisis does happen, you know exactly who to turn to. But I think, for example, bringing in NAMI for a presentation, or yourself going to NAMI and then learning more about non-law enforcement mental health crisis services in your community, that would be an excellent start.
Fantastic. Other thoughts?
So I have another answer, don't have another answer to that question, but I have a related thought, which is about, it's a more individual level intervention, but thinking about, you just mentioned it's hard to make a new connection when you're in distress. It's also hard to make good decisions when you're in distress, and to be able to articulate what you need when you're in distress. And so one thing that we think a lot about from the mental health side of things is how to take advantage of times when somebody is feeling well, is able to communicate well, and talk to them ahead of time about what should we do if fill in the blank. If we get to a point where this condition happens and you're feeling distressed, how would you like us to handle that? How would you like us to support you? What are the things that we can do to help create a safer environment for you? And be able to have that conversation in a calm time, in a safer time when the individual isn't in a lot of distress, so that when a distressing situation happens, you have like your little paper where you said, okay, we talked about that when this kind of thing happens, or you become more distressed, or you start to have these symptoms, here's how you'd like us to respond to that. Not in a mental health treatment kind of way, but in a way of like, if the person says, well, when I feel really paranoid, I think the maintenance folks might be taking something from my apartment, and it would be really helpful to me if you could accompany the maintenance person to my apartment when they're fixing whatever it is. And then okay, if the person's feeling distressed and they also have this maintenance thing, it might be a trigger for them to feel more paranoid if they think the maintenance person's going to steal their things or touch their things or whatever. But that perhaps your intervention could be helpful to them. So I'm going a little bit too far down that road, but my point is to try to have conversations with people ahead of time about what supports they think they would need if they have a distressing circumstance. So you have that information in your back pocket.
Great, thank you so much. You know, I could keep talking to folks and learning from y'all for probably hours, and I think others could too with the number of questions. But unfortunately, time is up for now. But really enjoyed hearing from everyone. I'm going to share slides so that we can hear more about the evaluation. But really appreciate all of our fabulous presenters today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all. And on behalf of HHRC, I want to thank our panelists. So many great takeaways. I know we had over 200 questions received during the webinar, so we got to as many as we can. So I just wanted to highlight a few other resources that we already have from HHRC related to this topic. We've got online courses related to serious mental illness. We are going to, come out with we have some resources on crisis planning. We're about to release some more information on introduction to mental health, crisis care, harm reduction. So please stay tuned to our listserv to access this information. We're going to take all your questions back and see how we can use them to shape our materials in the future. The next slide, just the thing to end on too, is here's a link to our certificate, the evaluation and certificate of participation. Sometimes the website glitches real quick, right? When everybody clicks on it, so stay patient. You should be redirected to it as well. And always reach out to us if we can be of any help. So with that, huge thank you to today's panelists. I had a lot of takeaways from this. I can tell from the Q&A we all did. So just thanks so much, and we will see you next time.